The rain was relentless, hammering Seattle's streets like a pulse that wouldn't quit. And I was burning up, my body a furnace of fever and defiance. I stumbled into the ER at Harborview Medical Center, half delirious, my vision swimming, but too stubborn to admit I needed help. Then she appeared, Dr. Elena Marquez, her name tag gleaming under fluorescent lights, her presence cutting through my haze like a blade. I was 28, a graphic designer with a chip on my shoulder, and a life that felt like it was unraveling. My name's Riley Parker, and I'd been dodging doctors for weeks, convinced I could tough out the fever that had me shaking and sweating through my leather jacket. But that night, as I collapsed onto a gurney, Elena's dark eyes met mine, steady and unyielding, and I felt something shift, something I couldn't name but couldn't ignore. "Stay with me, Riley," she said, her voice low, calm, but laced with an urgency that made my heart stutter. Her hands were cool against my burning skin as she checked my pulse, her touch professional yet impossibly gentle. I mumbled something incoherent, probably about how I didn't need saving, but she leaned closer, her breath warm against my ear. "You're not dying on my watch." The ER was chaos, beeping monitors, hurried footsteps, the sharp smell of antiseptic, but Elena was an island of calm. She was maybe a year older than me, her long black hair pulled into a neat bun, her white coat crisp despite the late hour. There was a quiet strength to her, a kind of grace that made the sterile room feel almost sacred. I didn't know then that she was a lesbian, or that her life was as tangled as mine, but I felt it, a pull, like gravity, drawing me to her. My fever was spiking, the world blurring at the edges, but Elena stayed close, her hand steady as she hooked me to and for. "You've got a nasty infection," she said, her brow furrowing as she read my chart. "Why'd you wait so long?" I tried to shrug, but my body wouldn't cooperate. Instead, I rasped, "Didn't think it was worth the fuss." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but her eyes were serious. "You're worth the fuss, Riley." Those words hit harder than they should have. I wasn't used to being seen not like that. My life was a mess of freelance gigs, late nights, and a family that barely spoke to me after I came out at 19. I'd built walls, thick ones, to keep people out. But Elena, she was already slipping through the cracks. Hours passed in a feverish blur. I drifted in and out, catching fragments of her voice as she spoke to nurses, her tone sharp when someone questioned her orders. At one point, I woke to find her sitting beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. The room was quieter now, the chaos of the ER settling into the hum of a late-night shift. "You're gonna be okay," she whispered, and I believed her not because of her title, but because of the way her eyes held mine, like she saw more than just a patient. Then it happened. I was shivering, my teeth chattering despite the blankets, and Elena leaned in, her face inches from mine. "I need you to focus on my voice," she said, her words a lifeline. I tried, but the fever was pulling me under, and before I knew it, her lips brushed my forehead, a soft, fleeting kiss, meant to comfort, to ground me. But it was fire, electric, searing through the fog of my illness. I gasped, my eyes flying open, and she pulled back, her face unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, her voice tight. I didn't mean, but I cut her off, my voice hoarse but certain. "Don't be." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, we just stared at each other, the air between us thick with something unspoken. The fever was burning me alive, but that kiss, her touch, was what I'd never recover from. By morning, my fever had broken, but I was far from okay. Elena was gone, her shift over, and I was discharged with antibiotics and a warning to rest. I left the hospital with her name seared into my mind, her kiss a phantom ache on my skin. I didn't know her story, didn't know if she felt what I did, but I knew I had to find her again. Seattle was big, but not big enough to keep us apart, not when every beat of my heart was screaming her name. I spent the next week recovering, my apartment a cluttered mess of sketchpads and empty coffee mugs. But my thoughts weren't on work or the infection that had nearly floored me. They were on Elena, her steady hands, her quiet strength, the way her kiss had felt like a promise. I'd never been one for romance, not after a string of messy breakups and a family that called my love a sin. But this was different. This was her. I started haunting coffee shops near Harborview, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Seattle's gray skies mirrored my mood, restless, uncertain, but alive with possibility. I didn't know if she was single, if she was out, or if that kiss had meant anything beyond a doctor's compassion. But I had to know. I had to see her again, even if it meant chasing a ghost through the rain-soaked streets. One evening, I saw her. She was leaving the hospital, her coat pulled tight against the drizzle, her hair loose and catching the light. My heart leapt, and before I could second-guess myself, called out, "Dr. Marquez." She turned, her eyes narrowing, then softening as she recognized me. "Riley," she said, her voice warm but guarded. "You look better." "I feel better," I said, stepping closer, my pulse racing. "Thanks to you." She smiled, but there was a shadow in her expression, something heavy. "Just doing my job," she said, but her eyes lingered on mine, and I knew it was more than that. I took a breath, ready to say something reckless, but then her phone buzzed, and she glanced at it, her face tightening. "I have to go," she said, her voice clipped. "Take care of yourself, Riley." And just like that, she was gone, disappearing into the rain. I stood there, soaked and shaken, knowing I just found something worth fighting for and that the fight was only beginning. The rain didn't let up, and neither did I. Seattle's endless drizzle became my accomplice, a reason to linger near Harborview, clutching takeout coffee as I watched doctors and nurses spill out after their shifts. Elena was a phantom, slipping through my fingers every time I thought I'd found her. But that moment her voice saying my name, her eyes catching mine in the rain kept me tethered to the chase. I wasn't obsessed. Not exactly. I was driven. I'd spent years drifting, taking freelance jobs to pay rent, avoiding anything that felt too real. But Elena was real, too real, and the memory of her lips on my forehead was a spark I couldn't extinguish. I started asking around, casual at first, dropping her name to baristas and hospital staff. "Dr. Marquez." "Yeah, she's intense," a nurse told me one day, smirking. "Brilliant, but she keeps to herself." I learned she was 30, a rising star in the ER, known for her cool head and fierce dedication. But there were whispers too about a past she didn't talk about, a family she never mentioned, a life she guarded like a fortress. I didn't care. I just wanted to see her again, to know if that kiss had been a fluke or something more. One night, I got lucky. I was sketching in a diner across from the hospital, my notebook filled with half-finished portraits of her dark eyes, sharp jawline, that quiet intensity. The bell above the door chimed, and there she was, alone, her coat damp, her hair loose. She didn't see me at first, just slid into a booth and ordered coffee, her shoulders slumped like she was carrying the weight of the world. I hesitated, my heart pounding. This was my chance. But what if she didn't remember me? What if that moment in the ER had been nothing to her? I closed my notebook, took a breath, and walked over. Dr. Marquez, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Her head snapped up, and for a split second, her guard dropped, her eyes softening. Riley, she said, almost like she'd been expecting me. Can I sit? I asked, and she nodded, her expression unreadable. I slid into the booth, my hands fidgeting with my coffee cup. I wanted to thank you, I said, for saving my life. She shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. You were a fighter. I just gave you a nudge. We talked, haltingly at first. She asked about my work, and I told her about my graphic design gigs, my love for sketching the city's chaos. I asked about her, but she deflected, her answers vague. Long hours. Not much else, she said, but her eyes told a different story, wary, haunted, but curious. I wanted to push, to ask about the shadows in her gaze, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I told her about the kiss. Not directly, but close enough. You grounded me that night, I said, my voice low. When I was out of it, you made me feel safe. Her face changed. A flicker of something, guilt, maybe, or fear. I crossed a line, she said quietly. I shouldn't have. I leaned forward, my pulse racing. I'm glad you did. The air between us crackled, heavy with what we weren't saying. She looked away, her fingers tightening around her mug. Riley, you don't know me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And I don't do this. I didn't ask what this was. I didn't need to. The way her eyes lingered on mine, the way her breath hitched at it was enough. She left soon after, citing an early shift, but not before I slipped her my number on a napkin. In case you need a sketch artist, I said, trying to keep it light. She smiled, a real one this time, and tucked the napkin into her pocket. Take care, Riley, she said, and I watched her disappear into the rain again, my heart a mess of hope and fear. The next few days were torture. I checked my phone obsessively, jumping at every notification. I sketched her face over and over, trying to capture the way her eyes held both strength and vulnerability. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that she was a doctor, busy, probably straight, probably not interested. But then, late one night, my phone lit up with a text. Hey, it's Elena. Coffee tomorrow. I nearly dropped my phone. I typed back a quick yes, my hands shaking. The next day, I met her at a small cafe near Pike Place Market, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and sea salt. She was in jeans and a sweater, her hair down, and she looked less like a doctor and more like someone I could fall for. We talked for hours about art, music, the way Seattle's rain made everything feel alive. She opened up, just a little, telling me about her love for jazz and her habit of running along the waterfront to clear her head. But there was still a wall between us, a careful distance in her words. I wanted to ask about her life, her past, but every time I edged close, she steered the conversation away. Still, there were moments, her hand brushing mine as she reached for her coffee, her laugh when I teased her about her terrible taste in sci-fi that felt like promises. By the end of the week, we were texting daily, meeting when her schedule allowed. I was falling hard, and I knew she felt something too. But there was something holding her back, something she wasn't telling me. And as much as I wanted to believe in us, I couldn't shake the feeling that our story was about to get a lot more complicated. Elena's texts became my lifeline, each one a spark in the gray monotony of my days. We met whenever she wasn't buried in the ER, stealing moments in crowded cafes or quiet parks. But every time I thought we were getting closer, she'd pull back, her eyes clouding with something I couldn't read. I wanted to know her, all of her, but she was a puzzle with missing pieces. One evening, we walked along the Seattle waterfront, the Puget Sound glittering under a rare break in the clouds. She was quieter than usual, her hands stuffed in her pockets, her jaw tight. I nudged her shoulder, trying to lighten the mood. "You okay, Doc? You look like you're carrying the whole hospital on your back." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just a long day," she said, but I knew it was more. I stopped walking, turning to face her. "Elena, what's going on? You can tell me." For a moment, I thought she'd brush me off again, but then she sighed, her shoulders sagging. "It's not easy to explain," she said, her voice low. "My life is complicated." I waited, my heart pounding, willing her to let me in. She told me fragments growing up in a strict Catholic family in Chicago, coming out at 22, the fallout that followed. Her parents hadn't spoken to her in years, and the weight of their rejection still clung to her like damp Seattle mist. "I threw myself into medicine," she said, staring out at the water. "It was the one thing I could control." I wanted to reach for her, to tell her I understood, but I didn't. My own coming out had been messy, but I'd had friends, a chosen family. Elena seemed so alone. "I'm here," I said instead, my voice soft but firm. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I thought she'd lean in, close the distance between us. But then her phone buzzed, and she flinched, checking it with a frown. "I have to go," she said, already stepping back. "Emergency at the hospital." I watched her go, frustration and longing twisting in my chest. I wanted to chase her, to demand answers, but I knew pushing would only make her retreat further. Instead, I went home and poured my feelings into my sketchbook, drawing her face again, those eyes, that guarded smile. I was falling in love, and it terrified me. The next time we met, she was different, lighter, almost playful. We went to a jazz club in Capitol Hill, the music wrapping around us like a warm blanket. She laughed when I tried to mimic the saxophonist's riffs, her hand brushing mine on the table. For the first time, I felt like she was letting me in, even if just a little. "You're trouble, Riley Parker," she said, her voice teasing but warm. "And you're worth it," I shot back, grinning. But the lightness didn't last. A few days later, I showed up at the hospital with coffee, hoping to surprise her. Instead, I found her arguing with a man in the parking lot, a tall guy in his 30s, his face sharp with anger. I hung back, my stomach twisting as I caught fragments of their conversation. "You can't keep doing this, Elena," he said, his voice low but furious. "You owe me." She shook her head, her voice steady but strained. "I don't owe you anything, David." I didn't know who he was, but the way she stood rigid, defensive, told me he was trouble. When he stormed off, I approached, holding out the coffee like a peace offering. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She took the coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "Yeah," she said, but her eyes were distant. "Just someone from my past." I wanted to press, to ask who he was, what he meant to her, but her expression stopped me. Instead, I walked her to her car, the silence between us heavy. "You don't have to tell me everything," I said finally. But I want to be here. Elena. For all of it. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I thought she'd open up. But then she just nodded, squeezing my hand before driving away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the scene in the parking lot, the way her voice had shaken when she said, "Someone from my past." I didn't know David's story, but I knew he was a shadow hanging over her, and I hated how powerless I felt. I wanted to protect her, to be the one she turned to, but I didn't know how to reach her. The next morning, she texted me, "Can we talk? Meet me at the park tonight." My heart leapt, but there was a knot in my stomach too. I knew this was a turning point for us, for her secrets, for whatever we were becoming. As I headed to the park, the Seattle sky heavy with clouds, I braced myself for whatever she'd tell me, knowing it could change everything. The park was quiet, the air thick with the scent of wet grass and pine. Elena was waiting by the waterfront, her silhouette sharp against the fading light. I approached, my heart a drumbeat in my chest, unsure if I was walking into a confession or a goodbye. She turned as I neared, her face softer than I'd ever seen it, but her eyes were stormy. "Riley," she said, her voice barely carrying over the lapping waves. "I owe you the truth." I nodded, my throat tight, and sat beside her on a weathered bench. The city hummed in the distance. But here, it was just us two women caught in something bigger than we'd planned. She told me about David. He was her ex-fiancé, from a life she'd left behind in Chicago. They'd been together before she came out. When she was still trying to fit into the mold her family wanted, good Catholic girl, future wife, future mother. "I thought I could be someone I wasn't," she said, her voice raw. But when I told him I was a lesbian, he didn't just walk away. He tried to fix me. Her words hit like a punch. I knew that kind of pain, not the same, but close enough. My own family had called my coming out a phase, choice, a sin. But Elena's story was darker. David had clung to her, refusing to let go, even after she moved to Seattle. He'd shown up at the hospital, demanding answers, threatening to tell her colleagues about her past. "He thinks he owns me," she said, her hands clenched. Like my truth is his to control. I reached for her hand, my fingers brushing hers. "He doesn't," I said fiercely. "No one does." She looked at me, her eyes glistening, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. Her hand tightened around mine, and I felt the weight of her trust, fragile but real. We sat there for a long time, the silence between us heavy but not empty. She told me more about the guilt she carried, the fear of being outed in a profession that wasn't always kind to people like us. "I've spent so long hiding," she said. "I don't know how to stop." I wanted to tell her she didn't have to, that I'd wait. But instead, I said, "You don't have to do it alone." That night, something shifted. Elena started letting me in, bit by bit. We spent more time together, late-night walks, quiet dinners in her tiny apartment, moments where the world felt small and safe. I learned her quirks, how she hummed jazz tunes when she cooked, how she'd fidget with her stethoscope when nervous. I fell harder with every moment, but the shadow of David lingered, a threat neither of us could ignore. One night, we were at her place, sprawled on her couch with a bottle of wine. She was laughing, her guard down, and I couldn't help myself. I leaned in and kissed her. Not on the forehead, not out of fever or comfort, but a real kiss, slow and deliberate. She froze for a heartbeat, then kissed me back, her hands tangling in my hair. It was fire. It was home. It was everything I'd been chasing since that night in the ER. But then her phone rang, shattering the moment. She pulled away, her face pale as she checked the screen. "It's him," she whispered, and I knew she meant David. She didn't answer, but the mood was gone, replaced by a tension that made my skin prickle. "What does he want?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. She shook her head, her eyes distant. "To ruin me." I stayed that night, sleeping beside her on the couch, but I could feel her slipping away again, retreating into her fortress. The next day, she was back to work, her text short and distracted. I tried to give her space, but I was scared of losing her, scared of what David could do. I started digging, asking around, trying to find out who he was. A friend of a friend knew him, a lawyer. Charming on the surface, but controlling, obsessive. He'd been asking about Elena, showing up at places she frequented. I confronted her about it one evening, my frustration boiling over. "You can't keep shutting me out," I said, standing in her kitchen, my hands shaking. "If he's dangerous, we need to do something." Her eyes flashed, a mix of fear and anger. "You think I don't know that? I've been dealing with him for years. Riley. You don't get it." Her words stung, but I saw the panic behind them, the weight she'd carried alone. "I want to get it," I said, softer now. "Let me help." She looked at me, her defenses crumbling, and nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "But it's not just him. It's everything." I didn't know what she meant. Not fully. But I knew I'd fight for her, for us, no matter what came next. Elena's everything was a storm waiting to break. She started opening up more. But each revelation came with a cost, a flicker of fear in her eyes, a hesitation in her voice. David wasn't just an ex. He was a specter of her old life, a reminder of the shame her family had drilled into her. He'd been calling her colleagues, dropping hints about her sexuality, testing how far he could push. "He wants me to run," she told me one night, her voice hollow. "To disappear again." I wasn't going to let that happen. I started spending more time at her apartment, not just for her but for me. Being near her grounded me, even when things felt like they were spiraling. We'd cook together, her jazz playlist filling the silence, and for brief moments, it felt like we could outrun the past. But David was relentless. He'd leave voicemails, vague but menacing, and once, a bouquet of flowers showed up at her door with the note, "You can't hide forever." I wanted to confront him, to tell him to back off, but Elena stopped me. "He's not worth it," she said, her voice firm but her hands trembling. "I just want to live my life." I admired her strength, but I hated how it came at the cost of her peace. I started researching restraining orders, talking to a lawyer friend about what we could do. Elena was hesitant, afraid of drawing attention, but I could see her resolve hardening. One night, we went to a queer bar in Capitol Hill, a rare night out where she let herself relax. We danced, her body pressed close to mine, her laughter bright against the thumping music. For the first time, I saw her unburdened, her smile unguarded. I kissed her under the neon lights, and she kissed me back, fierce and unafraid. "You make me feel free," she whispered, and my heart swelled, even as I knew the fight wasn't over. The next morning, reality crashed in. Elena got a call from the hospital. Someone had filed a complaint, questioning her professionalism, hinting at personal misconduct. It was anonymous, but we both knew it was David. She was shaken, her face pale as she paced her apartment. "This could ruin my career," she said, her voice breaking. Everything I've worked for. I felt helpless, rage burning in my chest. We'll fight this, I said, pulling her close. You're not alone. She nodded, but I could feel her pulling away again, retreating into that fortress I'd worked so hard to breach. I hated it, but I understood she was protecting herself, protecting us. We hired a lawyer, a tough woman named Sarah who specialized in workplace harassment. She was optimistic, but the process was grueling: paperwork, interviews, the constant fear of what David might do next. Elena threw herself into work, taking extra shifts to prove her worth, but I could see the toll it was taking. Her smiles were rarer, her eyes shadowed. One evening, I found her crying in her kitchen, her phone clutched in her hand. He emailed me, she said, her voice barely audible. He says he's coming to Seattle. My blood ran cold, but I kept my voice steady. We'll handle it, I said, wrapping my arms around her. Together. We went to the police, filed for a restraining order, but the process was slow, and David was slippery. He didn't show up at her apartment, but we'd see him at a distance watching from across the street, lingering near the hospital. Each sighting chipped away at Elena's strength, and I felt my own resolve tested. I wasn't just fighting for her. I was fighting for the life we could have. The one I saw in her eyes when she let herself hope. One night, we stayed up late, talking about what we wanted, not just now, but years from now. I want a life where I'm not afraid, she said, her voice soft but fierce. Where I can love you without looking over my shoulder. I kissed her, my heart aching with how much I wanted that too. We'll get there, I promised, and for the first time, I believed it. But the storm was coming, faster than we'd expected. David wasn't done, and the next move would be his. As we held each other that night, the Seattle rain drumming against the windows, I knew we were on the edge of something bigger, a fight that would test us both, but one I'd never walk away from. David's shadow grew darker, a storm cloud over every moment of peace we carved out. The restraining order was granted, but it felt like a paper shield, useless unless he crossed a line we could prove. Elena was unraveling, her confidence chipped away by his relentless presence. I could see it in the way she checked her phone, the way she flinched at unexpected noises. But she was still fighting, and so was I. We started taking precautions, changing her routes to work, avoiding the places he'd been spotted. I moved in with her, unofficially, my sketchbooks and clothes piling up in her apartment. It wasn't just about safety. It was about proving we could build something, even in the chaos. We'd cook dinner, laugh over Bat TV, and for brief moments, felt like we were winning. But David wasn't playing by rules. One night, we came home to find her apartment door ajar, the lock scratched. Nothing was taken, but the message was clear. He could reach her. Elena's face was pale, her hands shaking as she called the police. They took a report, but without evidence linking it to David. Their hands were tied. I held her that night, her body tense against mine, and whispered, "We're stronger than him." The hospital investigation was another blow. The complaint was dismissed. Sarah's legal work was airtight, but the whispers lingered. Elena overheard colleagues gossiping, questioning her professionalism, her personal life. She didn't say it, but I knew she was terrified of losing everything she'd built. I tried to be her anchor, but I was scared, too scared of how far David would go, scared of losing her to her own fears. Then came the breaking point. We were at a cafe, a rare moment of normalcy, when David walked in. He didn't approach, just stood by the counter. His eyes locked on Elena. My blood boiled, but she grabbed my hand. her grip tight. "Don't," she whispered. "He wants a reaction." I stayed put, but every muscle in my body screamed to protect her. That night, she broke down. "I can't keep doing this," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so tired, Riley." I held her, my own eyes burning. "Then let me fight for you," I said. "We're not running." She looked at me, her gaze raw, and nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice small but resolute. "But we do it together." We went back to Sarah, who suggested a trap documenting David's violations of the restraining order to build a stronger case. It was risky, but we were out of options. We started keeping a log, noting every sighting, every call. I took photos when I could, my hands shaking with anger and fear. Elena was stronger than I'd ever seen her, her resolve like steel, but I knew it came at a cost. One evening, we got the break we needed. David showed up at the hospital, demanding to see Elena. A security guard intervened, and we had it on camera clear evidence of him violating the order. Sarah pounced, filing charges, and the police picked him up the next day. It wasn't over, but it was a start. Elena's relief was palpable, but so was her exhaustion. We celebrated quietly, just the two of us, with takeout and wine in her apartment. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, and said, "I don't know how to thank you." I kissed her forehead, the echo of that first kiss in the ER. "You don't have to," I said. "Just keep being you." But even as we won that battle, I knew the war wasn't over. David was out on bail, and Elena's past still haunted her. She was healing, but the scars ran deep, and I wondered if our love would be enough to carry us through. As we fell asleep that night, her hand in mine, I promised myself I'd never stop fighting for her, no matter what came next. The trial was a crucible, stripping away the last of Elena's walls. David's charges violating the restraining order, harassment were solid, but his lawyer was slick, painting him as a wronged man, Elena as unstable. She sat in the courtroom, her face composed but her hands trembling in mine. I wanted to shield her, to take away the pain of having her life dissected, but all I could do was be there. Sarah was relentless, presenting our evidence, the photos, the logs, the hospital's security footage. David's charm crumbled under cross-examination, his anger slipping through. The judge's ruling was swift: a year in jail, a permanent restraining order, and a warning to stay away from Elena. When the gavel fell, she exhaled, her body sagging against me. "It's over," she whispered, but I knew it wasn't, not really. We left the courtroom hand in hand, Seattle's rain washing over us like a baptism. Elena was quieter now, but there was a lightness to her, a spark I hadn't seen before. We went back to her apartment, and for the first time in months, she laughed freely, her eyes bright as she pulled me into a dance to her favorite jazz record. "We made it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Kissed her, slow and deep, and felt her smile against my lips. But healing wasn't linear. Elena still jumped at shadows, still checked her phone too often. She started therapy, working through the trauma of her past. And I was there for the hard days, when the weight of it all threatened to pull her under. I learned to love her through the silences, the moments when she needed space but still reached for my hand. I moved in officially, my sketchbooks finding a home on her shelves, our lives weaving together. We built routines: morning coffee runs, late night talks, quiet moments where we just exist together. I started a new project, a graphic novel inspired by our story, pouring my love for her into every line. She read the drafts, her eyes shining. "You make me sound like a hero," she said. "You are," I told her. One evening, a year after the trial, we walked along the waterfront, the same place where she'd first opened up to me. The sky was clear, stars piercing through the city's glow. She stopped, turning to face me, her expression soft but serious. "I was scared to love you," she said. "Scared of what it meant, what I could lose. But you changed everything." My heart swelled, tears pricking my eyes. "You changed me too," I said. "That kiss in the air, it's still burning." She laughed, a sound like music, and pulled me close. "I'm never letting you go," she whispered, and I knew she meant it. We weren't perfect. There were fights, fears, moments when the past crept in. But we faced them together, building a life that was ours, messy, beautiful, real. Elena went back to the ER, her confidence returning, her colleagues' respect hard-won but unwavering. I finished my graphic novel, dedicating it to her, to the doctor who kissed me in my fever and saved me with her touch. As we stood on the waterfront that night, the city alive around us, I realized something. Love wasn't just the spark, the kiss, the rush. It was the fight, the choice to stay, to build something unbreakable. Elena was my home, and I was hers. And no matter what came next, we'd face it together, two women, scarred but whole, forever changed by a fever and a kiss.